Cool duo, I do not write these links, John Watson and Ben Edwards.
Thank you very much, Matt. Yes, good morning, everybody. We're looking forward to the warm-up coming up in just a few moments' time, and it is dry, it is cloudy. It's pretty much what we've seen all weekend so far. The forecast does indicate, hopefully, for a dry Grand Prix this afternoon, and I think, John, that probably will make the race more exciting, although perhaps just a little shower in the middle could enliven things even more.
Well, anytime there's rain around a Grand Prix, for sure you get an interesting conclusion from that. Hopefully that's not going to happen, because I think there's going to be enough excitement, because both tyre companies have not really had the full opportunity to do the testing development that they would do on a Grand Prix weekend. Remember, Friday was wet all day, so they had to sort of kaleidoscope everything into Saturday morning before they went into qualifying. So expect to see quite a lot of work going on with the teams. The trouble is they've made their tyre choices that had to be done for qualifying, and those are the tyres they will have for this afternoon's Grand Prix. The rest will come down to the strategy, but since everybody's pretty much going to go on a two-stop strategy, it will really be a choice of whether you make an early first stop or you decide to go very late into that first stop and then have a very quick second stop. So interesting opportunities for the teams, but with a bit of wind around, you never know at Silverstone, high cloud, anything can happen. And for sure, Jenson Button, who we're looking at right now, unfortunately, in qualifying, he had to jump in the spare car, which did not have the latest bodywork alterations or the latest upgrades on engines. So Jenson's chances of getting into the points and getting a podium may be slightly better than that 12th place in the grid would indicate.
Well, let's hope so, but it's going to be tough for him starting there. Overtaking not easy. It will, to a certain extent, depend on the strategy chosen by the Renault team, and I'm sure Jenson will be aggressive in the opening lap. Let's hope that that aggression is judged just right so that he can make it round safely. Kimi Räikkönen here did a good job in qualifying, just out qualifying his teammate David Coulthard. Coulthard actually aborted his last run. He was suffering with too much understeer on the car, and he suffered it again on that last run, so he just decided to back off and come into the pits.
Yes, but what was impressive was Räikkönen had a problem in his race car. He had to go into the spare car, and he did that time on the last lap in his spare car, and that's now a 6-4 qualifying advantage to the Finn Kimi Räikkönen. And I think that was also another very, very strong performance from the young Finn, just emphasising where McLaren see him in their longer term plans, and a sort of position that Räikkönen is fairly familiar with. He's had, I think, about 5 or 6 fifth place qualifying grid positions this year. McLaren really being out-qualified consistently by Williams and by Ferrari.
Well, Nick Heidfeld was a bit upset after qualifying yesterday. He did a good job, but he reckoned he could have been up to half a second quicker if Montoya hadn't got in his way at the end of his last flying lap. Well, of course, Montoya was just getting ready to go onto his final lap, and to be honest, it was perhaps more a function of the fact that everybody left it until the last moment, really, until they set their final qualifying time. We had 20 cars on track in those last few moments of the session.
Everybody knows the situation, everybody sits it out, and then they complain because there's no space in track. I mean, the last couple of minutes, virtually the entire field, 22 cars were out, and I mean, there is not space for 22 cars to get clear laps on that vital last 2 minutes of the session. But when Pablo Montoya did find it, and he did that brilliant middle sector of his qualifying lap, and real joy in the Williams team, and they put that one down to Montoya 100%.
That's right. Kimi Räikkönen leads them out. Michael Schumacher's in the spare car initially here. Of course, all the drivers will have an opportunity to use the spare car, and Michael, as ever, having it set up for himself, goes out on it first, and then he'll jump over to the race car to make sure everything is okay. The two Williams BMWs heading out of pit lane.
Interestingly, we've not seen anybody go out in a set of intermediates. It's what we have seen in previous Grand Prix. Of course, plenty of spare tyres, having had a wet Friday, so the pressure on tyres is a lot less, and also because the nature of the tyre here is a slightly more durable, a slightly tougher tyre than we've seen in Nürburgring or other events. So there's no problem with tyres.
So heading down towards the bottom part of the track, Kimi Räikkönen the first one out there, but just about everybody, I think, leaving the pits. There's one or two drivers still to come out. See Rubens Barrichello just leaving the Ferrari pit garage, and this important session which will help them set the cars up for the start of the race and decide their final choice of strategy and how much fuel they're going to start the race with. Jenson Button then, with those difficulties in qualifying, it was a fairly spectacular engine failure as he first went out in the session, so he had to dash back to the pits, get out in the spare car, didn't have the same aerodynamic modifications, also had an engine slightly less specification on the engine, so not able to perform quite to the extent of Jarno Trulli, and has qualified in 12th place here today. But we'll just have to see how he gets on in the race this afternoon. A lot of support for him, as we heard from the fans. A number of Jenson Button supporters here today will be cheering their man on, and great to hear how everybody's been able to get into the track so much more easily this weekend. It's been the same story this morning. The traffic has been flowing really throughout the peak periods of people coming in this morning, and access to Silverstone has been vastly improved.
Well, that's the good news story. Now we want to see a good news story in the race. And Raikkonen out of one car into a spare car. The field come back in after that one lap. And for many teams it will be a case of, well, Michael Schumacher doing the same thing. That was probably the T car he was in. He will jump into his race car now. And a very, very busy Sunday morning here at Silverstone. Half an hour will pass by, just literally in the blink of an eye. And the Ferrari team clearly having been maybe disappointed by this man, Juan Pablo Montoya's superb qualifying lap. That Ferrari didn't get two cars, and more so that Michael Schumacher of the two Ferraris is the one that starts in the second row of the grid. But never mind, Michael Schumacher and Ferrari well know how to take victory out of little setbacks like that.
Interesting quote from Gerhard Berger afterwards, and it was actually on the official Williams press release. So he said this was a very impressive performance by Juan. He said his last lap was simply unbelievable. You could perhaps call it the Montoya factor. So Berger impressed, and Berger himself has put in some monster laps here at Silverstone in the past. He took pole way back in 1988, the year that it was dominated that season by the McLaren Hondas, but the Ferrari of Berger was on pole that year. But he was very impressed by Montoya.
Yes, Rubens Barrichello, who we're watching now, we did see come down pit straight, and he went from left across the track to where his start position will be in this afternoon's Grand Prix, to the right hand side, in an effort to try and clean that part of track up a little bit. And now it's a bit of a forlorn hope, because there will be other events taking place here prior to the Grand Prix, of which the Porsche Michelin Super Cup will follow immediately after the morning warm-up, and then there are other support events as well. Nevertheless, Rubens Barrichello trying that little bit just to maybe help his efforts when it comes to starting this afternoon's 60-lap Grand Prix of Great Britain.
So Montoya going out in the spare car, or just about to, getting himself strapped in. Rubens Barrichello had a problem.
So just going to come out, straight back in and go, and again do a stop and go with a launch start as well.
Going through the routines of what needs to be tried out this morning.
If you want to repeat it, come straight back in the next lap as well. So you actually get two stops and go, it's not a problem.
And as I mentioned, Barrichello having a problem with his seatbelts yesterday, coming loose on his second run in qualifying, which can't have helped around a track like this, John.
No, it does not, and in fact it's a very unusual occurrence for a seatbelt to become detached, although they are quite tight, and once you're in place they're really pulled down. It's rare that that buckle would not be fully located to have it come undone. It may have been that somehow his elbow or his hand might have caught the release mechanism, but even that's probably unlikely, and just have one leg of a 6-point belt come undone would certainly be uncomfortable, and really you want to dive straight back into the pits.
Calling out the names of the corners here. Takuma Sato knowing all the names of the corners at Silverstone. He doesn't have to do it by number, because he knows this place well from his Formula 3 days.
Well, in fact, the Ferrari was on intermediates, and that is Rubens Barrichello. So Ferrari preparing, saving those tyres. They have, of course, 7 sets of tyres available from Saturday, and while it was dry all the way through Saturday, the tyres that would have been available to them on Friday, those 3 sets, which make up the total of 40 tyres, 10 sets, are withdrawn, and the team don't get use of those, even though they never had use of them in the first place.
Kimi Raikkonen does the T-car shuffle as well, as he gets out in both cars. Of course, he had to do this in qualifying yesterday, but did a super job, as we heard. He reckons he could have perhaps been a fraction faster if he'd been in the race car, just that little bit more familiarity with his own car, but he still did a great job on the third row. Once again, he started from the third row every time out so far this season.
But you can look down at the timing scores and sheets, you can see that after the second row of the grid, Ralf Schumacher's time 1:19.3, Kimi Raikkonen 1:20.1, 7/10 of a second in round figures. difference. I mean, that's a massive, it's a night and day performance difference between Williams, BMW and McLaren, Mercedes-Benz. But what we have seen in recent Grand Prix, and that was a tight little squeak from Montoya, just getting out ahead of Mark Webber, is that in the race that the McLaren-Williams package is a lot stronger relative to its qualifying performance, and that's where McLaren will really rely and hope that David Coulthard and Kimi Raikkonen can get in and mix and match with the two leading teams in this afternoon's Grand Prix.
So let's ride with Michael Schumacher, the man who starts in third place for the British Grand Prix this afternoon, beaten not only by Montoya but by his teammate. But the times were just so close in that session, and the three drivers separated by just tiny amounts, 0.04 of a second separating with those three drivers basically. So an incredibly tight qualifying session, and we're just going to have to see how close it is when we get out in the race, and whether Williams are going to be able to protect that advantage that they earned in qualifying. Mika Salo here, as you said, John, one of the stars of the show yesterday in that qualifying session, and Gustav Brunner, the technical director for the team, was very impressed with the way that they performed and dealt with all the panics, because as you said, they didn't go well on Friday. He didn't run at all, they didn't run well Saturday morning, and Brunner said, well, they stuck to the team philosophy, which is don't get mad, just get better. And that's their philosophy. When it goes wrong, just keep working away, and it worked for them yesterday. It
did. It certainly worked for Mika Salo. For Alan McNish, it wasn't quite so successful. Alan down in 15th place, and he'll have been disappointed by that. But the difference in times, in reality, from Salo in 8th and a 20.995 to McNish in 15th at 21.3, you're talking about just around about 0.4 of a second, but you're about four grid lines below your teammate. At that 0.4 seems like 4 days.
So David Coulthard starting from 6th position for this afternoon's Grand Prix. Twice winner of the British Grand Prix, of course, and he's done it from second row starting positions in the past. I wonder whether he's going to have some luck. He knows he needs it, because the McLaren-Mercedes package is simply not as competitive as the Ferrari and the Williams BMW here at Silverstone. It's had its moments, its flashes, particularly at Monaco, and David absolutely stunning there, but he's going to work hard this afternoon.
And I think the real key for Coulthard and Raikkonen will be the tyre wear rate on the Williams, and if that's been rectified and Williams can get control on that rear tyre wear, then the prospect of McLaren getting in and getting on the podium will come down to purely reliability, I think, because on performance basis there's sufficient gap between where Williams are on the grid and where McLaren are for them to draw clear of McLaren. So it's a rather disappointing day in some respects for McLaren to think that Williams might have got a handle on that rear tyre wear, that excessive rear tyre wear.
Great support for Coulthard at various parts around the track, and he goes fastest at this early point of the morning warm-up. Remember, these times just used for information for the team, not affecting the grid position at all, but useful to see just how quick the car will be in race trim. Ralf Schumacher not currently in his car, waiting for his opportunity. A bit frustrated yesterday after qualifying. He seemed to be the faster of the two Williams drivers for most of the session, and then Montoya came up with that last gasp effort that not only beat Ralf Schumacher but actually beat the Ferraris as well and took him onto pole position. So Montoya now outmatching Ralf in qualifying 6-4 so far this year. Montoya with this string of 4 pole positions, really proving to be the king of qualifying in this mid part of the season.
There's only 0.3 of a second between Ralf Schumacher on 4th and Juan Pablo Montoya on pole. But there, that look in his face, and that's not about qualifying yesterday, that's about the situation this morning. He's feeling that things are not flowing his way. It's all gone Montoya's way over the last, I suppose, let's say 18 hours anyway. When qualifying took place on Saturday afternoon. Nevertheless, Ralf Schumacher has been strong in races and is a very, very confident race driver. Only question mark about Ralf is his ability or his desire to go racing and get really mix it and match it, which is what we've seen Montoya do.
More feedback from Montoya. We're looking here at Alan McNish, an emotional day for Alan McNish. He said it meant a huge amount to him in Australia when he went out for the first time, his first Grand Prix out on the Drivers' Parade, but he reckons that today could be even more emotional, particularly that Drivers' Parade when they're out in open-topped cars, driving around the circuit, when he really gets a chance to see the fans, the support, as he makes ready for his first Grand Prix start in the UK after so many years of knocking on the door of this sort of a drive. Finally here at Silverstone in a Formula One car, a tremendous moment for him.
Yes, it is. It's a special moment in any driver's life, particularly as a British driver, the British Grand Prix, and its role in the history of the Formula One World Championship, being one of the inaugural Grand Prix in 1950 and holding a World Championship event every year since. And to sit on the back of your parade car and receive the accolades and the support from your fans all around the circuit, even for the most hard-edged Grand Prix driver, it still can get you.
Well, there's been a great deal of success from British drivers over the years. Some 11 different British drivers have won the British Grand Prix. Jim Clark, the most successful, so a fellow Scot, has been the most successful, 5 times winner of the British Grand Prix through the 60s and dominating proceedings, always driving for Lotus, of course, and the star of the show in terms of results, at least in the British Grand Prix. Michael Schumacher hasn't had that much success in the British race. It's one of the races that just never quite seems to go his way. He's fastest at the moment by exactly a second, however, from David Coulthard, then Frentzen third, so the arrow's running well. Massa is fourth currently, Trulli fifth, and Panis is sixth fastest.
Well, Michael Schumacher has done a 23.9, and they probably continue and go a bit faster. Fastest race lap last year, just to give you some comparison, in that runaway victory by Mika Häkkinen was at 23.4. So I would imagine that Michael hasn't got that much fuel on board, judging by the race lap that Mika Häkkinen achieved. And Mika just dominated the Grand Prix, won by 33 seconds from Michael Schumacher. Schumacher, of course, going in that one-stop strategy, which really hurt the Ferrari, and Häkkinen doing a brilliant job on the two-stop, and it was a copybook race. It gave us a glimpse of what Mika Häkkinen had in reserve. He didn't always show it in 2001, and of course at the end of the year he went into the sabbatical, which for me, if I translate Finnish into English, means retirement.
Interesting to see Ralph not doing many laps. Doesn't look as though they have a particular problem, but I just wonder whether they're not doing too much mileage. We did gather at the Nürburgring that they were limiting the amount of mileage a little bit because of the concerns about reliability, which has been a problem in the last couple of races. Montoya, on the other hand, is doing a fair few laps here at the moment. I wonder if they'll limit him later in the session. That's his 6th lap as he goes across the line. He goes 5th fastest now, from Michael Schumacher about 1.5 seconds ahead. Barrichello also on track, and he's likely to be putting in a quick lap. He's just been fastest through the mid-sector of the lap.
So everybody doing on Felipe Massa, and he made a little error, and that was coming out of Ferrari, and he got it wrong, went on the grass and got it back on for Brooklands.
Well, Barrichello, does go fastest indeed, so the 2 Ferraris at the top once again, but Ralf Schumacher still not out on track. Peter, I think you've got some more news for us on that and Williams' strategy in this morning warm-up.
Yes, I have. Now that I'm unfrozen, hopefully you can hear and see me all right. But a rather strange situation here in the Williams garage. In the middle of the warm-up, we've got 2 cars there on stands. No work being done at all. Everybody looks very calm and relaxed, and just Juan Pablo Montoya out on the circuit in the spare car. One has to assume that this is because they don't want to put mileage on those 2 fresh race engines. But also a little bit deeper than that, I think it's quite interesting that they don't feel any need to have to go out and scrub in tyres, which is something Michelin runners historically have had to do quite a lot of. So we might well see them running new sets in the race, which is a sign of progress from Michelin, that they do have the confidence now to start with new sets.
Yeah, that's a good point, Peter, because particularly at the Nürburgring last time out, they were doing a lot of running, weren't they? They really had to scrub those tyres in considerably.
They were, although of course Ralph started on a new set of rears, which is why he got that slight jump on Juan Pablo away from the line. I'm going to try and get on the pit wall opposite the front row, just as they take the tyre covers off at the start of the race, to see which of the Michelin runners are going to start on new tyres.
Great, well thanks for that. We're watching the Ferrari on track at the moment of Barrichello, again doing what you said, John, trying to clean up that inside part of the grid.
Yes, well, there's the way you don't clean up the grid or clean up the racetrack. Felipe Massa must have had an off actually coming out of Bridge corner, because he missed Prairie and he cut across and got back on track just before Brooklands. As we watch Jacques Villeneuve, who also had a good day yesterday in the top 10, 9th quickest, going into, well, probably going back into his race car or a spare car, whichever way they align them up in the garages. And Villeneuve and BAR Honda being the quickest of those 4 Honda engine cars in the field. Disappointing day for Jordan. For Fisichella, it was just a disaster. Takuma Sato once again doing a good job, and not really getting into trouble as we've seen him in some other circuits, feeling much more comfortable here at Silverstone.
Yeah, that's right. Like this man, Raikkonen, Fisichella had to use the spare car yesterday after engine failure. So a number of people were jumping around, and reliability seemed to be a factor in qualifying. Usually we tend to see good reliability at the Silverstone track, so a little unusual. This is Fisichella, and this is him a moment ago getting very out of shape.
Yeah, that's coming out of Luffield, and the car just drifted away. The rear of the car not quite up to the match of the front. And we now watch Takuma Sato through the same corner. And the Japanese driver comes out, good exit. And let's see where he is. Currently 7th quickest, and he now goes up to 6th quickest, so 125.3 against 123.1, which is the time Michael Schumacher has just recorded before he went into the pits. And Barrichello continues to swing left to right to try to clean up that part of track where he'll start this afternoon's Grand Prix at 1 p.m. in the UK. Of course, we are having to get into European time, and all Grand Prix in Europe are designated to start at 2 p.m. European Central Time, and that means 1 o'clock in the UK.
Raikkonen's just gone 3rd fastest, so now we have the 2 Ferraris and the 2 McLarens, with Coulthard 4th, Montoya 5th, Sato 6th, then it's Fisichella, Nick Heidfeld 8th, and then Frentzen 9th and Jarno Trulli in 10th. Just behind him is his teammate Jenson Button in 11th, and then Massa. Great shot this from Kimi Raikkonen's car, looking over the front wing at the front wheel at work, and giving it a little bit of an impression of the speed as he heads down the Hangar Straights, and the vortices coming off that rear wing as well in the early morning at Silverstone. And we now switch our attention to the Sauber of Nick Heidfeld as he comes around. He moves up to 5th place.
Yeah, he had personal bests in the 1st and 2nd sectors, so he concluded that little run by doing a strong 3rd sector, and he goes up to 5th quickest. And Nick Heidfeld was slightly disappointed because he got held up by Montoya on his best lap, and the 2 Bridgestone tired Saubers not as strong as we had anticipated. Heidfeld qualifying 10th and Massa 11th, and they thought they might be slightly further up, maybe 7th and 8th, certainly ahead of Trulli and Mika Salo in the Renault and Toyota respectively.
So once again looking at Raikkonen, and the 3rd fastest car on track. He's now up through the complex section. Sometimes it can be hard to spot exactly where he is with this camera, and it's a rather unique view at that front wheel. But he now heads back into the pit lane, comfortable with 3rd fastest at this stage.
And Jarno Trulli also now improving, doing a 26.8 in that 1st sector. Now that's about 0.8 of a second away from the fastest that we've seen, which is from Michael Schumacher. But it's in the zone somewhere around where Nick Heidfeld or Juan Pablo Montoya are, and they are 5th and 6th quickest. So we wait to see. Now look at the rear tyre wear, just trying to get a look at the back of. We'll just go away now. Back to Jarno Trulli as he comes up to compete this lap. This will be his 9th lap. Personal fastest in that 2nd sector, so we should expect to see an improvement from Jarno Trulli and the Renault, and a good exit once again out of Luffield. Currently in 10th in the 126.041. Let's see where he goes up. Well, half a second of improvement, but only goes up to 9th place.
Yes, starting in 7th place for this afternoon's Grand Prix, remember. Ralf Schumacher is at last coming out to do a lap or two just to make sure that everything is okay with his race car. And having sat out the best part of this session, just 10 minutes to go, the team deciding to send him out just to make sure all the systems are working correctly. And we've seen a number of electronic problems. Now, interesting here, David Coulthard.
There's a major problem with Coulthard. It looks like we've seen this in Monte Carlo. This is a problem with this. They've got 2 oil tanks. There's a supplementary oil tank that feeds the main oil tank, and it's operated by a pump. Now, that was the problem in Monte Carlo. Coulthard's going into the pits. This may be actually an engine problem rather than just an accessory. That looks to me, maybe it's more engine than it is something, as you saw in Monte Carlo, where the team were able to use shift-to-shore telemetry and fix that problem. I think David has got an engine problem, and that will be a bit of a shock and a disappointment for McLaren Mercedes-Benz.
Yes, that's right. The car, of course, has been fettled for the race. They changed the engine overnight. That engine was planned to run the race this afternoon, and now some concerns there around the back end of the McLaren Mercedes. And David Coulthard taking a close look. Not that he's going to be able to tell much. It's going to take the team to know what's going on. They'll already be studying the telemetry, the figures on the computers, and they may well know what the problem is already without even taking the engine cover off. But that's a bit of a concern for Coulthard, the twice winner here. some work to be done in the McLaren pit. We're riding with Heinz-Harald Frentzen, and Frentzen in the Arrows that didn't run at all on Friday. Tom Walkinshaw working flat out to get this team back on track. They are racing here this weekend. Still a lot to be sorted out in the coming weeks, I'm sure, but for Frentzen and Bernoldi at least, the chance to compete this afternoon.
Well, Frentzen currently 10th quickest on a 25.9, so let's see whether there's any improvement. It may be just the result of doing a number of laps, the fuel load reducing, and it's in fact a slower lap than his personal best to date. So for Heinz, maybe just he's on a series of laps done. In fact, now 8 laps on his 9th lap. You can see the little range of lights at top of the steering wheel on the dash. As we dive into the Jordan, they don't want us to see their front tyre wear clearly, do they?
Looks as though they're getting ready to send him back out.
Yeah, the only tyre was covered up was the one the camera was looking at. And it just shows you how sensitive teams are, that tyre wear, condition of tyres is a bit of a secret, even though we have full and open access into each and every of the pit garages. And Adrian Newey and Ron Dennis in communication to the garage about David Coulthard's problem. And the spare had been set up for Kimi Raikkonen, now it's a mad rush.
So yes, this is where they were changing numbers just a second ago, because it was set up for Raikkonen, as you say. So race numbers being changed, and David Coulthard now getting ready to come out in that spare car. Ralf Schumacher riding on board with the other Williams BMW, as he has come out now, and really this is his second flying lap, and he's improving all the time. He's going to put in a reasonable lap this time, I think.
Certainly he was comfortably flat through Bridge Corner, which is always a healthy indication of a good car balance. So now it goes on. The process of doing a few more laps, didn't get out for the first 20 minutes, and that was basically, I think, down to restriction on engine mileage, that BMW and other engine manufacturers are very strict in the number of miles an engine is allowed to do, and they decided to hold out until 3/4 way through the session. And we go on board with Montoya. 23.1 is the benchmark time Michael Schumacher has established, and Manuel 1.3 seconds away, and that's quite a bunch of time.
Of course, Williams may feel they don't need to do much running on full tanks here. They do a lot of testing at Silverstone, have all the data, but we'll just have to wait and see. Now, I gather that we can speak to Ron Dennis. Ron, have you managed to ascertain exactly what the problem is on David's race car? Ron, I gather we can speak to Ron Dennis. Ron, have you been able to ascertain what the problem with David's race car was? We seem to be having a problem linking up there. We'll just see if we can try once again. Ron Dennis, can you hear us? No, we're not seems to be linking up quite as we hope. We'll try again in a moment or two. We're watching Heinz-Harald Frentzen on track currently, and he's 9th fastest at this point.
Yes, he's gone quicker on that last lap, and this one should be a quicker lap again, because Frentzen's got greens in the first and second sector on the timing screen. That's in button 5 of your remote control, and he goes up to a very fine 6th place for Frentzen, and another encouraging run for the Arrows team. Remember, they didn't run on Friday because of legal issues. They came out on Saturday morning and did a great job. Didn't do so well in qualifying. Frentzen is 16th, Bernoldi 18th. Nevertheless, good performance this morning, and the team playing catch-up with the rest of the field.
Quick switch from one car to another, and here we are riding on board with Juan Pablo Montoya, as he is still 1.3 seconds slower than Michael Schumacher at this point in the morning warm-up, as the Ferrari once again looking very strong in race trim. But let's remember that they could be running different fuel loads in this morning warm-up, and we don't get a clear picture really until the early stages of the race, and even then it's not a clear picture because they may be running quite different strategies.
Well, Felipe Massa's done a good job. He's gone 5th quickest with a Ferrari powered Sauber, which is badged a Petronas engine. This should be quicker for Michael. He was up in that second sector, and it is 23.035. That's just over a 1/10 of a second. Just down a gear through Copse and then pulls that gear. Only just really a means of braking the car rather than using the brakes itself. And now all of a sudden our timing screen, that's page 5, is gone green pretty much everywhere. Montoya, Sato, Villeneuve, Massa, Salo, Ralf Schumacher, McNish, and those are just for the split times, for also seeing it throughout the field.
So still work going on to get the spare car ready for Coulthard to come out. Here we are on board with the pole sitter, Juan Pablo Montoya, as he uses this time to make those final adjustments, and we'll often see him on the formation lap, the installation lap, when he comes out before he goes on the grid, making the odd change. We've seen that a number of times this year on the interactive service, listening to him on the radio, but he's coming back in this time.
Yes, but just interesting, Michael Schumacher's split time is almost a second up. Look at the bits of debris on the circuit compared to Montoya. Now, either Michael's running a very low fuel load, or this is the race pace of Ferrari, which, if that is the case, Ferrari are just going to run away. He did a 25.8 in that first sector, a 35.7 compared to the middle 36s, low 36s that we're seeing from everybody else. This is going to be a devastating lap for Michael Schumacher. It's going to be in the middle 122s without any problem whatsoever. 22.8, not quite the middle, but still well under the 123, which is the previous time that Michael Schumacher had achieved. And now he's about 0.6 of a second faster than teammate Barrichello.
Well, Montoya's back into the pits, and they've just got to work on their own programme. He said yesterday, yeah, he'd love to win the race, but his first priority is to finish. And he's missing a few finishes recently, so Montoya desperately just chasing some points. He's still involved in a battle for second in the championship, remember.
Ben, Takuma Sato, we haven't seen much of him. Fourth quickest, 124.591. Now, that's obviously a fairly low fuel load, but nevertheless, it's putting the Jordan team where they would like to have been in qualifying in terms of what their pace is going to be through the race.
Let's see what his teammate's been up to. This is Giancarlo Fisichella. And he had a car in front. I don't know if that affected him. He came into Abbey very quickly indeed, didn't he?
Yes, there's a bit of a misjudgment on the part, and he got it all wrong there. We see Bernoldi, we think it is.
No, it's Frentzen, I think. It is Frentzen.
There's a Copse corner we're seeing in the showing Copse, so just the back of the arrows as it was pulled away, car 20. And unfortunately for Heinz-Harald Frentzen, he stopped. Now, whether that's mechanical, we didn't get to see the reason. It's all being pulled back by the managers.
Barrichello's on a good lap. Meanwhile, they're nearly ready to get Coulthard out. Quite a lot of changes, obviously, to be made for Coulthard to come out in the spare. Here's Jacques Villeneuve. Been looking good all weekend. As you mentioned, a great effort in qualifying. 9th on the grid here today. And, well, maybe a chance of BAR scoring their first points of the season. They would need a little bit of poor reliability, perhaps, from those ahead. But you never know. Villeneuve confident in both wet and dry conditions. He was happy on Friday, said the car handled well. He was happy after qualifying, says it's feeling particularly good in the fast corners compared to what it has been earlier this year. So perhaps the revisions that they brought in Canada are really beginning to have their effect.
Yes, and what happens when a team brings in a modified bodywork aerodynamic package? You can do all the testing, but there's limits on that ultimately, and it just takes time to get to understand what you've now got. While the wind tunnel gives you figures, it doesn't actually convey what it will be like on the track. And to some degree, that's what Jaguar are suffering from. But having said so, both Renault and Williams have brought brand new aerodynamic parts that they have not tested on the racetrack and are satisfied with them. Jaguar did have that test down in Spain, as well as going to the Ford Proving Ground in Belgium at Lommel. So they've got practical experience. So if the thing works and it's good out of the box, then you don't need too much setup time to get it to work consistently, and that's I think what Jaguar and BAR maybe were suffering from.
This is a good lap from Barrichello coming up. This could be enough to go fastest. The two Ferraris once again are looking superb in the warm-up. Yes, he goes fastest by nearly half a second. Barrichello ahead of Michael Schumacher. Sato's just gone third fastest. What a great effort from the Japanese driver.
The checkered flag is out, so this session is over, but anybody still on a lap will be able to compete that lap before they have to come back into the pits. Now, one has to assume that the time Takuma Sato did was with a very low fuel load. Nevertheless, it's a very good time, an indication that, again, the Bridgestone tyre, we've got Bridgestones 1 and 2. It was 3 because Raikkonen has now gone third quickest as we go with Felipe Massa.
Yes, Massa crosses the line but stays in 8th place. Temperature, of course, relatively low at the moment, John. A lot of cloud cover. It's earlier in the morning. Michelin runners do seem to like a bit of heat. Mika Salo said yesterday that for him, for the Toyota, the sun coming out for qualifying certainly helped them in his attempts and good efforts to get 8th. Coulthard crosses the line in that car, and of course he won't get a full flying lap in. He'll have to come in, but at least he did get out in the spare.
And he also was doing what Barrichello was doing, because he's starting on the right of the grid. He came out of Woodcut, pulled straight across the track onto the right hand side to help clear away rubber and other debris that may have gathered over the event of the weekend, plus all the support events that have taken place.
So it's been an eventful morning for the McLaren Mercedes team. They've got some work to do with David Coulthard's race car, and one or two other teams seemingly having problems. Frenson's car stopping out on the exit of Copse. We don't quite know what the problem was there. Everyone else, I think, managing to get a decent number of laps in. Ralf Schumacher choosing to do only 5 laps during the session, and that compares with 15 laps for Michael Schumacher. Michael Schumacher doing the most, along with Takuma Sato, both of them racking up 15 laps during this morning's warm-up.
What Felipe Massa was doing there, coming off the old circuit, he came down what looked to me like club straight, rather than being on the Grand Prix circuit. That looked like he'd either gone off track in Ferrari and driven down the National Straight, which is parallel to, this is the Grand Prix circuit just between Ferrari and Brooklands. Let's look again and see if we can see why. There it is. Felipe Massa went off at Ferrari. He drove straight across the gravel, went onto National Straight, and we saw that a second ago, and it wasn't a new line into, there it is. How he got it so badly wrong there, I can't quite work out, but anyway, the young Brazilian maybe thinks it's the quicker way around Luffield around Priory and Brooklands.
Well, Barrichello delighted with the performance there, this morning's warm-up, and fastest overall once again over Michael. He starts ahead of him on the grid, and he's faster than him in the warm-up, but what will happen in the race itself we are yet to see. David Coulthard back in after his problems, but at least they've managed to give the spare a decent run. Felipe Massa being pushed back in after his dramas there on that last lap. Qualified in a good position yesterday, just behind his teammate. They're 10th and 11th on the grid, but he was 8th fastest this morning. So the Bridgestone tyre certainly working well in these cooler conditions. We'll just have to see whether the sun is going to break through this afternoon, and that could just favour the Michelin runners a little bit. You have to say, though, as ever, Ferrari are looking very strong indeed. And if David's going to have the spare car for the race, they better get switching the names around. It still says Kimi on it everywhere. Now, Peter is down in the pits, and he's got a chance to speak to Ron Dennis. Peter.
Ron, any news yet on the problem with David's engine?
Well, we think it's pretty terminal, so we're going to change it. But we don't have the exact data, other than we certainly have a sufficiently large failure to warrant changing it. So that's what we'll be doing.
A bit frustrating to have to split the car before the race, particularly as it is the race car, of course.
Well, I mean, it's, as you say, frustrating, but it's not the end of the world. We've done it many, many times before. Better that we pick it up now than it happens in a few laps into the race.
You outraced the Williams BMWs at Nürburgring. Can you do that today?
Well, I still think we have a car is a little kinder to the tyres. And the early part of the race, I would presume that everybody's going to be reflecting their qualifying pace until they get into tyre degradation, and then maybe we'll be able to take them on. I think the important thing for everybody on Michelin's is that it doesn't rain, or if it does rain, we want it to rain a lot.
And what's the McLaren forecast on weather? It
says it's going to stay dry, but it's hard to believe when you're stood in this greyness, but that's what they say.
Thanks very much, Ron. Good luck.
Thank you.
Winners of the last 3 British Grand Prix, the McLaren team, but it's going to be a tough job for them to do that here today, starting on the 3rd row of the grid behind the 2 superb Ferraris, and strong Williams, of course, 1 on pole and 1 in 4th place. We're just looking through the classification of the morning warm-up, and Eddie Irvine, I'm afraid, last. He ran 9 laps. De La Rosa did a slightly better job. He was 16th fastest. But today they will probably be using this race as an extended test session as much as anything, as they try to work on that new aerodynamic package and make it work around this 3-mile Silverstone track. They'll have plenty of support out there. The question is whether they can put in a decent performance. The cloud that Ron was referring to, we can certainly see, heavy grey cloud, a little bit of brightness on the horizon, you never know.
Well, the weather forecast certainly over this part of England, sort of central southern England, looked like it was going to be reasonably good. Temperatures in the high teens, and well, there's always the prospect in an area like Silverstone. Although it looks flat as a pancake, Silverstone is actually slightly higher than the surrounding countryside.
now rejoining our coverage in the pit lane, looking at afternoon's British Grand Prix. It is grey, it is a bit chilly. You wouldn't think it's middle of July, would you? People still wrapping themselves up against the elements somewhat, but so far it has remained dry. We've got plenty of action coming up. Soon we'll be getting ready for the start of the Porsche Michelin Super Cup race here, one of the support races at Silverstone, and we'll be bringing you full interactive coverage of that in just a few moments' time. McLaren, one of the more busy pits, that's for sure, with an engine change now having to take place on David Coulthard's car, and more setup work carrying on the spare car. Ferrari dominating this morning's warm-up. Are they going to be able to repeat that sort of performance in the race this afternoon?
Well, judging by the pace of both Ferraris, they might be trying to kid people into thinking they're going to run on a slightly lower fuel load than their competitors. It is going to be a two-stop Grand Prix for most witness to hope, and well, maybe the Jordan team need some help from John to see their cars get into the points once again. But no doubt the performance from Takuma Sato this morning, a very strong performance again, probably on a fuel load that was lower than Giancarlo Fisichella had on board, indicated that Jordan can run strong. And of course the Bridgestone tyre does suit the slightly cooler conditions which we had this morning, starting that morning warm-up at 8:30 as opposed to the normal European 9:30. And elements not particularly conducive or comfortable, and people well wrapped up. And where has our British summer gone? It just disappeared out of sight.
Well, as the work continues at the moment on the cars, we'll be coming back with all the interactive channels in just a moment with the Porsche Super Cup action, so do stay with us. And for the moment, we'll go back to Matt in the studio.
Intrigued by that shot of the Jordan pit there. A piece of garlic, or a whole clump of garlic, and a picture of the Pope, which Giancarlo Fisichella is obviously confident will ward off any bad spirits and help him on his way to a points finish.
Fantastic. We wouldn't be here without
Max.
Absolutely great.
Just do great.
Yep. Hi guys.
Hi, hello there.
To sacrifice it for the race, but it's the race you get the points, and that's where we want to score.
Is he a good race driver, Sato? Is he developing into a good race driver?
I think he makes unbelievable starts. Having said that, he'll probably do a horrible one today, but I believe he makes great starts. He is a real fighter. Watch him on the first couple of laps because he is absolutely dynamic. And there's no reason to believe he won't stay up with the big boys.
Thanks very much, Eddie. One final question. Any headache this morning? Any headaches this morning? I'll let you know.
Live with headaches in that pit lane. Now then, just under 4 hours to go until the 2002 British Grand Prix. Still confused as to who you think might win? Well, maybe a look back at the 2001 Grand Prix might help. Jack, thanks for joining us. A good result so far at the British Grand Prix weekend. Would it be fair to say you're optimistic about this race, more optimistic than you have been for some time?
Yeah, the car's been working well all weekend, in the wet, in the dry. So, and in general, we're more competitive in the race than in qualifying. So yeah, there's something to be excited about.
What about this track? It's not the home race for you, obviously, but it is for many of the team. Do you enjoy Silverstone?
It's a fun track to drive, most of the lap anyway. There's the two tight chicanes, Vale and Abbey, that are very annoying, but the rest of the lap is beautiful.
You had the chance earlier this week to go around the Honda factory, meet some of the guys, some of the many guys behind you in Formula One. Do you enjoy that sort of thing?
Oh, it's very important because everybody's working hard. We are at a racetrack, but the people that are not at the racetrack, the factory, are working hard as well. So it's an important boost.
Jack, thanks for joining us. Good luck in the race.
You don't want to tempt fate or anything like that, but he went very well this morning, Takuma, didn't he?
Well, we went equally badly yesterday. That's the trade-off. We went on a much harder tyre. I think the race here is so important, and to open the opportunities that are available. It could rain, it may stay dry. We've got now, from Friday, we have a very good wet setup, and this morning finally on the hard tyre, which was a disadvantage yesterday, but hopefully will play into our hand today.
When you say harder, you were talking about relative to Ferrari?
I think Ferrari, probably one of their drivers is on the same tyre as us. I'm not sure about the other. Obviously, it's all cloaked in.
Well, the Ferrari drivers say they're on the same tyres.
I wouldn't believe that for one moment, and neither would you if you were on. But anyway, leaving that side aside, I can tell you both of ours are on the same, and we're both on the hard tyre. It's always a difficult pill to do because the qualifying's so important, and to give up a small advantage by going on a softer tyre in the qualifying, to sacrifice it for the race, but it's the race you get the points, and that's where we want to score.
In wet conditions, although not terribly wet, but the rain's still falling at the moment as everybody prepares for another race that's coming up. There will be an F3 support race coming up before the start of the Grand Prix, but it's the Grand Prix that everyone is now thinking about, looking forward to, and wondering, is it going to be dry, is it going to be wet, and how will that affect the relative performances of the likes of Ferrari and Williams? Certainly from what Ron Dennis said earlier on, it could well favour the Ferraris and those intermediate Bridgestone tyres. But in the Super Cup race we've seen a great effort from Wolf Hensler. He now has moved up into third place in the championship, courtesy Philip Peter, who failed lap, fighting his way back up, but finding it a bit harder once he got into the middle of the battle between Damien Faulkner and Darren Manning. Manning coming through as best of the Brits in 9th place. Unfortunately, we lost Richard Westbrook with what looked like a mechanical failure earlier in the race, But for the British fans there, Darren Manning was the star of the show, finishing in 9th place. So that's the Super Cup from Silverstone. Now our attention turns towards the Grand Prix this afternoon. Take a little while before we're all ready to go, but we'll be bringing you all the action here on Sky Digital Plus. From the track, let's now return to the studio to John Watson and Matt Lorenzo.
Thanks very much, Ben. As we look at those pictures of intrepid motorsports fans braving the elements, with the confirmation we've just had actually from the pit lane that summer has been cancelled this year, which is a blow to all of us, although...
Well, did you miss it?
Well, the thing, yeah, exactly. I have two questions. One, we're one of the most invaded nations on Earth. Why, for example, when the Romans got here wearing skirts, landing around Dungeness area, did they not turn around and go back home because of the weather? We'll save that one for later, in fact. And secondly, bearing in mind the weather is totally unpredictable and could be wet, there are some drivers who would be quite happy with a wet race. Why is that?
Because they think they've got an advantage. They think, particularly those with the Bridgestone wet and the Bridgestone intermediate, which is really the big advantage, because I think the Michelin wet has probably now come up to almost parity with Bridgestone. It's that transitional phase in a race. If it starts wet, 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 there's no choice. You've got to start on a wet weather tyre. If it then moves through a period where there's a drying line, but it's never going to be dry, and you want to make your pit stops because you're going to have to come in for fuel anyway, you may opt to go on to the intermediate tyre, and that's where the Bridgestone tyre advantage lies. And of course, for people like BAR, Jordan and Sauber, those are the three principal teams in running on the Bridgestone tyre behind Ferrari. Never forget Arrows as well. Then they would see that as being working to their advantage. And if they did run on that intermediate tyre, then you'd expect to see a Ferrari 1-2. And as I said, in fact, I think on our Friday broadcast, for the performance that we saw from Fisichella on Friday, indicated that they could even sneak onto the podium. But you're asking for a big ask, and it would have to be wet, and it would have to stay wet pretty much through at the point when you're doing your fuel stops. Then you'd go on to the intermediate, and then that's where your advantage would come by.
Well, if we take a look at the grid, Montoya on his 4th pole on the bounce, that's a terrific record, whatever happens in the race, really, and proof that he could be, I say, a rival to Schumacher if they had similar equipment.
Well, if it's a dry race, I think it's going to be very interesting, because depending again on the choice of tyre, and Eddie Jordan was very open about what his team are doing, and he sort of alluded that Ferrari may have gone one with one tyre choice, one with another tyre choice, Ferrari indicating they may have got identical tyre setups. So it's all uncertain, but what is clear is that Michelin have made a step forward with the tyre they brought here to the British Grand Prix. In fact, it plays more to the Williams advantage than it would have done to, for example, McLaren, who benefited from that slightly softer tyre compound that we saw in the Nürburgring for the European Grand Prix. So McLaren are slightly less benefited by this tyre change than Williams will be. And if it stays dry, it will be a question of, will we see Ferrari repeating what they did in the Nürburgring and running fairly light fuel loads and clearly going for the two-stop strategy, which is what they did, or will they just try not to be too clever? It's just a guessing game and just let the race come to them. They feel that they've got the better race car, they've got the more reliable race car, we know that. And from now on, Michael Schumacher doesn't actually have to win races. He's just got to get on the podium to ensure that he concludes his 5th World Championship.
As we look at the other half of the grid, Jaguar, I'm afraid we've done to death, and let's hope they can improve upon a lousy weekend so far. But what about Takuma Sato? There he is on the grid there, but in warm-up, 5th fastest, 4th fastest?
4th fastest. I mean, great time. I mean, did a superb job. Indicative of the amount of fuel they had on board. Again, confirmation from Eddie that they were running on the harder, the different, there's an optional and the prime tyre, and they were on what I would consider was the optional tyre. And if you can get temperature into that tyre and you've got balance, it's actually probably an easier tyre for a driver like Sato to use. While it doesn't have the ultimate grip that the prime tyre has, it's probably more consistent, and therefore for Sato it might enable him over the course of the 60 laps to get into that rhythm more easily and make a car easier to set up. But starting in 14th in the grid, it's a big ask to try and ask him to get into the top 6, let alone anywhere higher than that.
What about the pit stop strategy? Of late, that's made for some fascinating viewing, hasn't it?
At Silverstone, 2 stops are the way to win the race. That's what Hakkinen did last year. Michael went on a 1-stop strategy and lost out in doing it. Hakkinen won at a canter by 33 seconds. So I don't really think anybody's going to try and do anything differently, unless they've got their own meteorologists, which many of the teams do. They've got people outside the circuit with radar scanners scanning the weather, and they're getting literally by the minute, well, by the 10 minutes, updates on what the weather is doing. So those will be working overtime to tell the teams, is there any chance of rain at any point during the race? Because that will affect what they want to do. And if they know that rain's going to come within maybe 5 laps of a scheduled stop, they can adjust their schedules accordingly. So a lot more goes on the pit wall and behind the pit wall than even we get to see, and that information is privileged information.
What about the private battle within Ferrari? Barrichello beat Schumacher last time out and has been faster than him so far this weekend. I mean, will Schumacher be thinking about that as you...
Matt, wake up. Have you been watching this year's championship? There is no battle going on in Ferrari. There was a situation where Michael made an error, and we saw on the replays in the Thursday show there was actually small amounts of debris in the track, which may have caused Michael to have that spin off. Had that not occurred, I suspect that you'd have seen Michael getting past Rubens one way or the other. But when that spin occurred, then they had to redo this strategy. And after the pit stops were played out, the final pit stops, Rubens was ahead, and that was what the team chose to do.
All right, time for a short break now, and then we're back with the continuing saga that is Juan Pablo Montoya. Let me also remind you that you can now buy a season ticket that gives you all the great interactive experience for just 50 quid, and that's for the whole of the rest of the season. You can do that by calling 08702 418 111 or by hitting the red button on your handset as soon as we come off air. We'll be back at 12 for the Foster's British Grand Prix with the green light due at 1. Ferrari have now had 45 consecutive races with at least one driver on the podium. It's a stunning record. Can they keep it going? Well, join us a little later to find out.